And we welcome you back to the Hockey Happy Hour. That was a nice little ditty from the Offspring called Bad Habit. Man, the 90s were the last really good time of music, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I was just saying that on most radio formats, they'll play the new cuts, and then they'll go right back to the 90s in their music. And Offspring, man, brings me back to a lot of memories from high school under the bleachers, you know what I mean?
Good old times, man. Hey,
Bad habits.
hey, what's that you got in your hand? It's a cigarette, I swear. It is not a joint. I have a nicotine addiction. Nothing else. I promise.
Yes.
Yeah, sure you do. Anyway, we move on. And, well, we talked about bad habits, and Pittsburgh definitely has plenty of them, and we were talking about that earlier with Columbus. They're really not doing all that well right now when it comes to this game, and like we said before, if they lose Game 5, Game 6, my opinion, it's all over. So, we leave from one team with bad habits to another team with bad habits, particularly the Minnesota Wild. And they have a bad habit of picking up bad goaltenders. But we look back now, and it's Minnesota and Colorado. They're tied at 2 apiece. I did not expect this to happen, personally. I thought it was going to go to 6, but I thought it was going to be Colorado all the way. But it's really been a back-and-forth series. What, do you think it's the youth not being able to really take full advantage of Minnesota's mistakes, or do you think Minnesota's defense is just doing so well that they're creating the offensive attack for Minnesota?
I think their whole team's doing well, speaking of Minnesota Wild, and I kind of expected it. I knew that they were going to give Colorado fits because they are that hand underneath the skirt. You know, you don't see them coming. Little devil's advocate reference there. You know, they've gotten decent goal scoring, and they got proven goal scorers in Parise, Danny Heatley. You know, he's looking like the Heatley of old. And what's been really a surprise and a welcome surprise for Minnesota Wild is Darcy Kemper coming in, relieving Bobrovsky of his duties. And, you know, he's gotten them 2 wins in this series. And honestly, this is all-out war going to Game 7, firm belief in it. I mean, I feel that Minnesota can handle them defensively. We knew that. And certainly, yes, your point of Colorado's youth creeping up has come into play, but they haven't played as young as they really are. A lot of that comes from the expertise of Waugh. Paul Stastny, that's been there for a while, certainly lending a hand to Captain Landeskog. And, you know, it's really – this has been the most entertaining series of all the series for me, and I'm just glad that my expectations were met. I really am. Yeah,
and it's been a strange kind of year for Minnesota. They've been drifting in and out of the playoffs, and for Colorado, it's been more of one of those, it's our proving year. It's the year where it's almost like puberty, would you say? They finally sprouted. They blossomed. Colorado finally blossomed this time around. They finally pulled off a great season. They've had such solid goaltending from Varlamov. They've had great offensive attack from O'Reilly, Stastny, McKinnon, just Landeskog. Just a great play from that whole team. And Colorado, man, again, like I said, they blossomed finally. It took a while. It took plenty of years sitting down at the bottom of the barrel, people thinking they're irrelevant, and now they're finally starting to show their true colors. As for Minnesota, they've had an odd year. They've been drifting in and out of the playoffs. They've had their high moments. They've had their low moments. They've been having their goalie debate. They get Brizgal from Edmonton, and they think maybe that will sew up the seed and turns out it isn't, big surprise.
Well, it's been a goaltender carousel in Minnesota all year.
Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, right? And Brizgal up in the mix, there might be a correlation there. But yeah, Backstrom that really couldn't hold on to the job. You had probably their best goaltender, Harding, fail. Like the MS just got the best of him and had to, postpone his season due to the illness. And out of all these possibilities, Darcy Kemper to the rescue. Unbelievable. Only in the NHL playoffs.
Yeah, so we've got that 2-2 tie between Minnesota and Colorado. How do you see this series playing out now that we've got a split of 2 games? I personally see Colorado taking full advantage of home ice with the Pepsi Center. Do you see the same thing?
I do, and it's going to go the full 7 like I predicted, and just purely based on the fact that 2 of the last 3 games are in Colorado, they hold on, they squeak through this, and it may propel them to greatness in this playoffs. What do you think, Henry?
I mean, it's been a good series. I mean, 2 overtime games. It's been tight. I like the home ice advantage also. Well, let me talk right here.
That's okay.
I like the home ice advantage.
When you're popping tops off at hockey happy hour, it happens. I do it every week.
Hey, I'm not drunk. You can't tell me how to do anything. You and your 3 heads. So shut up.
I've just gotten lucky this week.
It's been another good series. I mean, so I like the home ice advantage too, and I think they'll prevail. You've seen some interesting play, but I think you're right. The shoddy goalie play is really gonna hamper them in the long run here. So,
well, Kemper has come forth with 2 solid games. Can he continue it? That's the question.
Yeah, that's a tough thing because that's always been the debate of Minnesota. It's not been the goaltending itself; it's been consistency. Yeah. Again, does that sound familiar to you, Philadelphia fans out there?
I know.
Oh, yeah.
It's just one of those things where the parallel is so obvious. It's just like, from plenty of years of seeing this happen with the Flyers, Minnesota's in trouble. They are really in trouble
because it's never got us anywhere. It's never got us anywhere.
No. The last Cup final, we had Michael Layden starting for us, and we saw how that ended. So,
yeah. And you couldn't even get Mason coming through, the first part of that series healthy. So, there's always something.
It's always something. Between Chet Manick having his breakdown and Martin Biron not doing well his second year, and between, Esch not being what we thought he was going to be 4 or 5 years later, and Niittymaki being a backup for life, it's just like, my God, man.
Don't forget about Brizgalov either.
Oh, yeah, Brizgalov.
Let's talk about the biggest train wreck out of them all.
And the universe so humongous big, and I'm afraid the bear, but barren forest. Oh, my God. And women are like Siberian husky. They're nice and beautiful with blue eyes.
They were talking about, on my way up here, they were talking about the worst contracts ever. And I have to throw Bobrovsky's contract up in there, along with Bynum's and a couple other bad Philly contracts, but that was another just awful. Ugh.
Well, considering the fact that we traded for it was kind of bad, really.
Yeah, you give up on Richards and Carter to be able to afford Brizgalov. Hindsight being 20/20, was it the right move? Was it the wrong move? I like where this team has come, since then. But Brizgalov was not the answer, and never will be the answer.
And the funny thing is, usually when these guys, these bums leave Philly, they go and do something somewhere else. I was kind of happy to see him just cut bait with them, what I mean, through part of that season too. So it was like, okay, I think we made the right decision on that one. Obviously, it was a terrible decision with the financial commitment in the beginning parts of it, which I was still shoddy when he was like 30, turning 31 years old, giving him all that money. But
because Paul Holmgren loves handcuffing himself, man. He just likes to pull a Harry Houdini. See how the hell he's going to get out of this one, man. Yeah. It just does it time and time again,
No.
Well, it looked like it could have been happening all over again because, while bringing Brizgalov, they have bad goaltender needs. And I believe he was either 5-0-2 or 4-0-2 going into the last game of the regular season. Got shelled in that regular season and then has continued in the playoffs. So, luckily it wasn't a former star of ours coming on to glory.
Right.
It was just a flash in the pan.
Yeah, when I saw him give up that soft OT goal, I'm like, there's the Brizgalov from Philly. There's the Brizgalov.
Well, I got fooled because going into, our playoff, preview, I was saying, wow, I really think Wild could beat the Avalanche because Brizgalov's playing like he did back in his Anaheim and Phoenix days. So I was fooled. Mm-hmm. I'll be honest with you. I thought we were seeing him return back up to the tops.
And I agreed to disagree. Yes, we're plugging that show. You're welcome, Tom Arnone. And we agreed to disagree on that one because of the simple fact of I thought that Brizgalov is just getting lucky. He's not going to have that good of a series. And boy, that happened.
Yeah, certainly did.
I don't like to speak ill of them. Nah, the hell I do. He sucked for Philly. He's dead to me.
And it goes back to what we're talking about there. Just really inconsistent goalie play around, not just obviously in the playoffs so far, but around the league early parts of this year too. So it's the Vezina's going to be a little crapshoot at the end of this year.
It is. Only the really solid ones for the season can say they're probably going to get that Vezina. Because I know Rask is one of them. Mm-hmm. He's a dead obvious pick for the Vezina. And in my opinion, he's probably going to get it. So, I don't think there's any argument here.
I was going to say,
I think Rask is getting that one. Yeah.
They actually announced the finalists. It's Tuukka Rask, Ben Bishop, and Semyon Varlamov for Colorado.
Okay, you're right. He won.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. Nothing against Ben Bishop, but he got hurt, and that basically screwed Tampa right out of this series against Montreal. I bet you if Ben Bishop was in goal, it probably would have been better than Anders Lindback. They might have stood a better chance against Montreal's onslaught. On the other hand, I mean, Varlamov is young. He's got plenty of years to win the Vezina, so I think it's definitely going to be Rask's by the end of this year. But anyway, speaking of goaltending, let's talk a little bit about the St. Louis Blues and the Chicago Blackhawks. It's been a goaltending duel for most of the series, and it's been an overtime thriller, time and time again for both sides. And, to say the least, it's been anything short of miracle working by St. Louis in a couple of games. And then, of course, Chicago finding their feet, finally, and getting a couple of wins when necessary against St. Louis and Chicago. Gentlemen, what are your thoughts on this series between Miller and Crawford and the back-and-forth play that you've seen from both St. Louis and Chicago? Two solid offense, the two Titans of the West. What do you think of this series?
It's a tough one to gauge. It's really a coin flip. I mean, the Blues jump out 2-0, and then the Blackhawks steal back and get it back to 2-2. So it really depends on what Blues team I have a feeling we're going to see here in Game 5. You know what I mean? If they're going to kind of turn it around and get back to the way they were playing in Game 1 and Game 2, I like them. But if you see what you see in the last two games, it's going to be tough for them to win. Blackhawks have really been, they really turned it on here. It was a big win for them in OT, 4-3 to get that series back to 2-2. So they definitely got a lot of things rolling for them right now. So once you get that confidence going, it's going to be tough to whack them off of there. But we'll see I think that this game is going to be crucial to dictate what's going to happen in this series.
It certainly will be. I mean, Game 5 is probably going to be that focal point game, and you're right. Every series has that defining game, that one game that pretty much tells you they're winning this series. We've seen it hundreds of times from all particular kinds of teams in any series, and it just shows, okay, this is the team that's winning this series.
Right.
I just saw them win the big win for the series, and I think that we're starting to see possibly that build up right now for Game 5. And do you see this going to OT? Because at least 3 of the games have gone to OT so far, and they've all been exciting beyond belief.
I was going to say it's hard to say not. It's hard to say not. It's a really even matchup here too, versus 2 of the better teams in the league too. I like the Blackhawks. I mean, I picked the Blues in this series from the beginning, them winning it in 6. The possibility is still there. Like I said, them losing 2 games in a row, and especially that nail biter there in OT, the last game, it's hard for me to really jump on their back saying they're going to come out here and win Game 5 and then take it in 6. If they come out, I'm just going to go along with my initial reading on this one. What are you thinking, Rob?
I'm thinking that when it boils down to it, who's healthy and who's not.
Yeah.
That's what's going to be, because you're right, it is an absolute coin flip in the series. And going into the series, I was like, man, this is going to be a great series. And then you heard, St. Louis going off to that, poor end of the regular season record. They lost their division. They, could possibly have Oshie, Backus, half their lineup out for Game 1. Now, everybody returned in time, and you saw St. Louis go up to that 2-0 lead. Mm-hmm. Then Seabrook decided to just pummel Backus into the boards and into the ice and knock him out and get suspended for it inversely.
Oh. And speaking of which, haven't we seen a couple of pretty bad hits in this
playoffs?
That
cooked me the other night. That was gross.
Yeah, that was horrid.
He's a shoddy player like that.
Yeah.
I mean, he played for Pittsburgh for a couple years too, if I'm not correct.
Yeah,
he was always that little instigator when he was playing versus the Flyers too. So I remembered him too.
He was always the little bastard.
Yeah, he was always that little bastard.
He just wanted to see somebody on the Flyers pummel him.
Yeah.
It was just the way it was.
Yeah, and when it comes to knee-on-knee injuries, there's nothing more dangerous than that. maybe a slew foot possibly in terms of coming back and hitting the
that.
head.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We've seen that between the Rangers and the Flyers. We've seen slew foots.
Now, that all being said, definitely deserved a suspension. Did he deserve 7 games? I think it was a bit excessive. I think it was based on his reputation that he
I thought it was a little hit him hard, but I know he's had some run-ins before, so I think, and they've always take that into consideration in the NHL. You know what I mean? It's a lot of your
Ronaldo.
Exactly. It's a lot of what you've done before. With the way they gauge the way they handle these guys.
And when Giroux did it, he only got suspended 1 game. Now, obviously, that was the last game of the season for the Flyers that year, but it was only 1 game.
Right.
He didn't get suspended for 2 or 3. Ronaldo got like 5, 10, 15,000. He got a ton of games.
It happened so quick too.
Unfair,
I think the way they looked at it, that there was intent to do that. Yeah. He looked away after he acted. He completely. I had nothing. I didn't have nothing.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? It was that typical cook, that cook reaction. It was like, get the. But come on now.
What did Seabrook get though? He got 3 games.
He got 3 games.
3 games. Now, in terms of intentionality, after he hit him, it wasn't him, but Duncan Keith. Did you hear what he said to Backes when he was laying on his ground? He goes, "Wakey, wakey, Backes," because he knew he got his bell run. He knew there was a concussion involved there, and. In terms of, Chicago's a dirty team like that from top to bottom. And Seabrook gets 3 and Cook gets 7. It's purely based on reputation because Seabrook hasn't been known as one of those dirty players.
Right.
He did get the elbow up. He did get suspended in that hit. So be it.
Yeah, that's the way it is. And I don't think Seabrook's not that kind of player. We've never really seen him do that before.
Right.
As compared to, I've seen Keith do it before,
Yeah.
though. Duncan Keith has done it before. Yeah. And Patrick Sharp is no stranger to it. He was a former Flyer, so he is used to doing things like this.
I think suspensions were valid in every case.
Yeah,
so I think they got that right. But I do agree with Rob. It is slightly a little excessive, especially at this point in time of the year.
But strange by his absence in this whole thing, San Jose Sharks' Rafi Torres has yet to do this.
Yeah.
I'm surprised. Torres has done this at least 2 playoffs in a row, and he hasn't done it yet. I'm like, when's he going to get that nasty hit on somebody? I'm waiting for him to get banned from the league per life because of this.
It's bound. It's really bound to happen. But to tell you the truth, all credit due to him in that series. He's done a good job getting underneath the Kings' skin. They have aggressed more against him than he has against the Kings in that series, and it threw them off their game in the first 3 games of that series.
Maybe McClellan is finally able to balance out Rafi's tough play with his playing ability, because he has helped out the offense too. He's at least helped with maybe 3 or 4 goals in game 1. He got assists on. He had a phenomenal game 1 offensively. So you're thinking, this is Rafi Torres of all people.
I think that helps him out, though. You get a little more involved. He gets a little more in the offense, which makes him feel like he's just not a single player out there to take somebody out. You know what I mean? And I think that could help if you integrate him a little bit more into and he starts playing more of a role in different aspects of the game. It's only going to help him when it comes to something like that, because he doesn't want to be taken off the ice then.
Yeah. And so right now we're looking at Seabrook getting suspended for 3 games. Will that come back to haunt, Chicago in any way, do you think? Or do you think that this will just kind of be one of those things, you know what, Seabrook bringing out sucks, but it doesn't handicap Chicago in any way, shape, or form?
He's a fantastic defenseman. He will be missed, but they have plenty of blue liners in their Chicago to where they can overcome that. What I don't think St. Louis can overcome on the inverse is the loss of their captain Backes.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately this was a series that, going into it, I thought Chicago was just going to whoop up on St. Louis the way they crept into the series. Then St. Louis got healthy, went up, had some miracles happen in the first 2 games, quite frankly, and put them up to that 2-0 lead. I'm like, all right, St. Louis can get healthy and move on and have a great playoff as predicted. Now it's all up in the air, and it really is. I really think Chicago will come out of this series by, a cone hair.
That's a good analogy. That's why I had to go with coin flip on it, because it is a really it's a touchy one to jump on either side of this matchup. It's been so back and forth to get a really good solid feel on this one. But, like I said, I'm going to stick to my guns with St. Louis on this one. We'll see how it plays out, though.
Yeah, who knows? You're right either way. Whether you pick Chicago or you pick St. Louis, you're not wrong, So it could go any way at this point. So
Whoever does come out of this series, though, watch out for that team come rest of the playoffs.
Because they got to face off with the winner of Colorado and Minnesota. And no doubt about it, Minnesota, they got through Colorado. They're still getting eliminated in the semifinals. There's no doubt in my mind on that one. But if Colorado does, I say Colorado would give either team a hard time, but that would be the end of Colorado. I don't think they'd have enough to get through St. Louis or Chicago for that matter. So that's kind of the way I would see that divisional playoff being looked at this point. And that's weird, saying divisional playoff. Haven't said that in forever.
I know. It's back. It's back,
I was thinking that myself. I said Metropolitan Division semifinals. Like, good God, that has not been a playoff series in how long in the NHL?
Long time.
A long time.
Well, hopefully the Blues can hold it together, and because really, going with your pick, Matt, Blues really could run wreck shop through this. I think they have more propensity to do that than the Blackhawks. So you always want to see the best play the best.
Yeah, you always do. You always want to see. The top teams of the year facing off with each other, and these are the top teams in this division. Colorado might have won it, but they snuck in from two teams that were really on a downturn at the end of the year, and they kind of got lucky winning the division. When it came to Chicago and St. Louis, they're really the two top teams to that division. There's no doubt in my mind on that one. So we've talked about the playoff series, and we've gone through them, and we actually have time left. Holy shit. But we are here now, and it's time to talk a little bit about the history books. The NHL is filled with many great series, time and time again. We're going to talk about some of the interesting moments of playoff history for these particular franchises and in these particular series. And we're going to start with the one that ended. Montreal and Tampa Bay. Now, this has very little to no history to it. There's only one playoff series that these two teams have ever had, and that was in 2004 between these two teams. In 2004, the Tampa Bay Lightning, at the beginning of the year, were a shit team. Nobody thought in a million years they would be in the playoffs. But at the end of that second half, though, they were the top team in the Eastern Conference. Wow. You talk about a transition overnight.
Right.
Then when they became the top team, they basically went to the first round, faced the New York Islanders. The Islanders were a subpar team, lucky to be in the playoffs. They beat them in 5, went on to the next round. Montreal wound up getting a huge 7-game boost, beating Boston, their hated rival, and going to the next round. 1 seed versus 7th seed. The series didn't last very long. Tampa Bay eventually they wore down Montreal. Montreal didn't have much going for them at the time. Again, this is kind of the pre-Carey Price era, the we actually have a shot, pre-P.K. Subban, pre-Brian Gianna era. Gianna was still on the Devils at the time, and Danny Briere was a Sabre at the time. So this was before they had anybody. And so it was kind of like Montreal was fighting an uphill battle from day one. Tampa swept the series. One game did go to OT, though, ended with Tampa winning. They swept it. They moved on. Now we go on to the next round, and it's Tampa Bay versus Montreal. Montreal gives back at you to Tampa Bay this year. What do you think of that? What do you think of that history? Do you think a good karma kind of lesson here for Tampa?
You coming to me on that?
Yeah. What do you think? I'm coming to any one of you guys. Feel free to throw in. What do you think of karma here? Just kicking in big time on Tampa.
I mean, it's hard to argue with that. Tampa sweeps them. They come back and sweep them back. I mean, obviously, it wasn't as disparaging of a result where you had the number 1 seed Tampa Bay, and they were just a rock solid team in 2003, 2004, led by Captain Dave Andrechuk, and then. You can kind of see that being, predictable, 1 versus 7. But this was a 2 versus 3 in this new, I don't know what word you want to describe this whole new format from Bettman. It's ridiculous.
the Einstein Project by Bettman.
I mean, when I started to get into it a little bit, I'm like, this sucks. But anyway, but anyway, so basically, in terms of point totals, that's identify with that. They were very close in the standings, very even matchup. My jaw hit the ground each and every game in this series watching Montreal sweep them. And, I mean, we've discussed why it happened in terms of just desserts. Yeah, maybe doesn't share the same players on Montreal that they did back in 2003, 2004, but the organization remembers that ass whooping.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it fueled that fire. So I think there is a bit of a correlation. I'm sure they were happy taking out Steven Stamkos, who's just super dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
And moving on for the fact that for the whole Eastern Conference, not having I honestly thought, and we thought, that Tampa Bay was going to be Boston's best, competition, and now they're gone.
Yeah, it is a little surprising.
It's a little strange now because now it's almost like Boston can run rickshaw over the entire Atlantic Division playoff. No, maybe that's not true. Maybe because if anybody feeds off of Boston, it's Montreal. There's one thing you can't take away from Montreal is if they face Boston, something happens when they get into Boston. Montreal doesn't care. They love it. They love the Boston crowd telling them to go F themselves.
Yeah,
they love it,
like
man.
That Flyers-Pittsburgh thing.
Yeah, the Flyers feed off of the Pittsburgh fans. They just enjoy it. They enjoy being hated. It just makes them play better. And I say that's probably why Montreal has won the majority of their series. It wasn't just because Montreal basically was God's hockey team and, won 25 Stanley Cups and, had all those great players for all those years. I still say they just fed off of the Boston crowd. They really fed off of Boston hating them. And if anything, I could compare it to the Yankees and the Red Sox. The Yankees, I think, feed off of the Red Sox fans, and they let it just
there's
burn
rivalries.
the Red Sox,
especially those rivalries over years. it feeds into that, and they just build up so much animosity towards that. When you get there, you almost feel like it drives you a little bit.
Yeah, it must. It really must, considering the fact that these two teams have just absolutely hate each other going in. And if Detroit just packs it and goes home.
Yeah.
That could very well be the defining ending for their season.
And this discussion just helped me hit a nail on the head why this resulted in a sweep by Montreal. Tampa Bay played really well this season against more of their rivalry-type teams, the teams in Florida, teams in their division, excluding Montreal here, of course. Being that there's such disparity in location, not much juice going on, I wondered why Tampa Bay was so flat throughout the series, and that could be why.
Right.
They get fueled by that competition, and they were thinking, oh, we could certainly get past Montreal, maybe even looking past them, and they got shanghaied.
Yeah, that's the last thing you ever want to do is start looking past the team thinking they're just going to skate right through.
Yeah.
And I think that has a little more to do with the way this whole entire series went than anything. Especially when you see a team playing flat out there like that, I think they just think that we're gonna turn on the second period, we're gonna turn on the third period, and all of a sudden, they're down two goals, and there's no turning it on, and all of a sudden you're down 3-0, all of a sudden you're going home. So it can quickly turn around on you just like that. You know what I mean? They say 7-game series getting into it, but once you're past game 2, it can turn on you really quickly within a game or two with the way that series is going to go.
Well, the way that any series could go, sometimes if you take an opponent for granted, they'll surprise you, and then you're left wondering, well, we could have won. You don't underestimate your opponent,
And I think you're seeing that a little bit, like I said, we're talking about earlier with that Pittsburgh Columbus series. I think you're seeing that really rear its head right now. Against Pittsburgh, I think they thought they were going to skate through, especially the way Game 1 and Game 2. Well, I think they had more of an upper hand on the series going into Game 3, but then it's kind of swung back to stalemate now. So we'll see how that goes too.
Yeah, regular season record 5, undefeated. Pittsburgh definitely overlooking Columbus.
No offense,
absolutely.
No offense or buts about it. And I think even with Bob being a little shaky in the beginning, they thought even more. And then they threw right back in their face in Game 2, and it's been kind of a little drag-out fight now since then. So definitely keeping my eye on that series.
Knock them out, drag them out. Well said, sir.
So now we turn our heads to an original 6 matchup that hasn't been seen since 1952 and 1953. That's how long Detroit and Boston have never faced each other.
I was about to say that they had to have had a rivalry back in the day.
They did, though. They actually competed.
That was the last time, 53.
53 was the last time. Basically, my grandparents were teenagers.
And my dad was too.
my grandparents were teenagers the last time that they faced off with each other. That is unbelievable.
It's crazy. I think it's over 60 years.
That was in the original era, right?
Yeah, the original 6 era. That That was just a little bit before expansion because the 60s was the last sort of period. I think 1963 was the last year that it was the original 6, and then the expansion happened after that.
And then, so your only hope at that point is to reach in the Cup Finals, really, at that point.
But strangely enough, that was where these two teams have particularly met very often. Boston would face Detroit a lot in the finals. Boston was swept by Detroit very first time in 1941 by the Detroit Red Wings. Wow. So the history is very interesting between these two teams because they do have a rivalry. It just hasn't been ignited for so long. It's like a wet match in a dark cave. Like it hasn't been sparked for so long, you know. And now all of a sudden, fire's been.
Don't go too far. I got to slow that one down. Wet match in a dark cave. That was amazing. I've never heard that one before. That was great.
Awesome visual.
But it's like, I mean, it's been that long since these teams have faced off with each other, and it's crazy, man. It's just like, what do you think of this series so far? I mean, do you think it's worth the wait, or do you think it's been a bit of a disappointment because of Detroit's season? You know, do you think that, you know what, maybe if Detroit had been more acclimated, is a good word for it, into the Eastern Conference, do you think we would have seen a 7-game series, or do you think that this is okay for the first time since 53, you know, I mean.
Well, it's been over 60 years, so, you know, it might take a couple, you know, more matchups to really, you know, really start breeding that back. But you would think, I mean, it's 2 of the original 6 that it would have had a little more to it. But I think what we were talking about earlier, you know, the Red Wings have been hurt by injuries. You know, Rask has been playing, you know, really, really solid all year. So, you know, it was a tough matchup for them. So either way, I think Boston's the better team. So I think that has more to do with it than anything.
Yeah. I'm a little disappointed about the way this series has gone up to this point because I really thought Detroit would be a great test for Boston in the first round, just based on how they match up against each other. And Detroit was also undefeated against Boston in the regular season. I think to the tune of 3. I think they only played 3 games, but they won all 3. So I'm like, great, this could be a great test. And at first, you know, Boston took off. Detroit tied it up. Now that Boston has the 3-1 lead, and if Boston were to go on to win this next game, which is looking that way, being back in Boston, it would be a serious disappointment for me because I really felt that this would, like I said, be a great test for Boston in the first round and not let them just coast into that second round and really challenge them. Now, that being said, it still could happen. You know, Detroit, you know, just got Zetterberg back. He'll have another day or 2 of practice. You know, hopefully they get Jimmy Howard back in net from the flu. They could win up in Boston. It has been done before, and that would be great. Just to reignite that old school rivalry that you mentioned from the 50s and really give Detroit a place in the Eastern Conference and like start fueling that fire and developing new rivalries.
And what better way to do it than to knock off the big dog in the East and then to face Montreal? And Detroit hasn't faced Montreal since the Stanley Cup Finals of God knows when. You know, like seriously, that.
I mean, they have the opportunity to turn it around still. You know, I mean, it is only 3-1, so I mean. The knife is to the throat now, you know what I mean. So if they're gonna, you know, turn it out, you know what I mean, and actually spark that, this is the time to do it. And Rob brought up very good points for that to happen too. So
and remember, getting that 4th win in any playoff series, it's the toughest thing to do. It is the hardest win to get because that's a desperate hockey team on the other end, and you have put them in this position. And you know when you cage an animal, the animal will fight back and try and scratch and claw and do whatever it takes to survive. That's exactly what we expect the Red Wings to do against Boston.
And if they get up early, I think that can, you know, they can swing that. You know, problem is if Boston gets up real quick, they get 2 up on them, they lock down on defensively. It's over.
All right. So,
in order to renew this old-time rivalry, even if you don't win, really just show up physically.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Can, you know, scrap it out a little bit. I know.
Yeah, at least get a little blood
saying.
on the white jersey of the Red Wings, you know, just a little bit. So that way it shows.
You don't want them to win it, as Rob was saying, too easy.
Yeah. No, you want at least a few of them to walk away with a few less teeth than when they walked in, you know. Maybe a couple black eyes here.
Throw them to the crowd, right?
Yeah, throw them to the crowd. Yeah, it's like, here, have my tooth. Yeah. But Now it's time to take a look at a series that we have probably seen if we've been observant on the playoffs for the last few years, and it's kind of been a newer rivalry, the Kings and the Sharks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these guys have not been rivals until recently, and it all started in about 2011, 2010-ish time.
Yeah.
The Kings and the Sharks faced off in the conference quarterfinals, and this was the pre-Jeff Carter, Mike Richards trade. This is when Simmons was on the team, and, of course, Scuderi was still around, and you had, of course, Brown was kind of a rookie starting to develop himself. And the Kings had a pretty young, very fast, quick team. Jonathan Quick was new at the time, and it was a pretty good team. They went up against the Sharks, the mighty San Jose Sharks. The Sharks were, of course, had Joe Thornton, Patrick Marleau, kind of the same team that they have now. And it was competitive. It went 6 games, but eventually the Kings just were overmatched. They couldn't survive, and the Sharks got rid of them. The next year, they didn't face off. The year after that, the Kings and the Sharks face off in the semifinals. This was the year that the Kings get their revenge. The Kings were going towards the Stanley Cup. They were hoping for it. They had just eliminated the Vancouver Canucks, and the Kings were doing well. The Sharks had just gotten out of a really rough series with the Blues, and you're thinking, okay, what are we going to see? 7 games, Kings win. Jonathan Quick stood on his head and shocked everybody.
Yep.
And now we come to this year. So it's revving up. This is becoming quite a hot-blooded rivalry between these two teams. Now that we see the Sharks go up 3-0 on them,
Yep.
and the Kings desperately trying to get back into it, it's one of those newer rivalries that you got to be excited for.
It's natural to see this happen, meaning, as you described, including this year, 3 out of the past 4 years in the playoffs. I don't care how close you were before that. You could be related, and now you're brawling.
Right.
And it's been the series over the years have been kick some dirt, kick the snow in the ice of the goaltender. It's been chippy nonetheless for two teams out in the West that are more prolific for their goal scoring. It's gotten chippy, and that's why you see like the Sharks pulling in like a Rafi Torres to really heighten that. And it's no surprise to me that the Sharks have a strong staple hold on the series.
No doubt about it. I mean, it's just one of those things where I think the Sharks now, at first, I don't think they respected the Kings as much as they probably should have. And the Kings came back and shocked them that one year when they, of course, won the Cup. But the Sharks now started to say, okay, this is a Kings team that can actually pull it off, because they did. They did.
Well,
they
knew that. Yeah, I was going to say they beat them. They know they can beat them, and that's what builds that. You get back and forth. There's not been that where one team is just stepping on the throat of the other team the whole entire series. The one year it's one year it's the other. So when you go back and forth and you can beat that team, it really breeds that. That the competition really starts, breeding through there, and that's where you start seeing these better games, and you can kind of see it now in the playoffs too, and that's where I think it gets chippy too, because these teams are starting to know each other, and they don't like some of these guys, and that's when the elbows and that's when the sticks start flying. So
yeah, and now, of course, we start seeing a little bit more of that chippy play, and we start seeing more of the Sharks really saying, okay, we know how to beat you, and we are going to beat you because we now respect you. Yeah. There's one thing about not respecting a team and then beating you. It makes you respect them, but it also makes you evaluate them just a little bit more.
Oh, yeah.
That's when it's scary. It's one thing to beat them once. It's another thing to consistently keep it up. I mean, anybody can beat anybody. Let's just throw that out there. In any given NHL playoff, anybody can beat anybody. 100%. But when that team beats you for the first time, it's kind of like you learn your lesson. And then you're like, okay, they can beat us now. Let's watch them, and let's actually see what they can do, so that way we can counter them. If that team still can beat you, then they got a jinx on you. That's when they realize, okay, this team owns us, kind of. For the Sharks, it hasn't been the case. The Sharks so far have said, okay, you got us last year, but we're getting you this year. It's kind of like, okay, all right. We got you now.
It all depends on, are the Sharks done with their choking ways, or are they ready to take us?
Well, I didn't say that, but,
I mean, that's what it's going to boil down to. And I think the question, or the answer to that question is yes. They just have made improvements to their team from past years. They have 3 solid scoring lines, great goaltending. It's hard to find a chink in this armor, and it's no big surprise that they've jumped to this lead on the Kings. and I don't think they're going to be done with this series. I mean, I'm not looking past it. I know it's a big mountain that the Kings have to come back from 3-0. They've gotten the first win. I just don't think that, as you pointed out earlier, they're going to be able to pull off, the next 3 in a row to come out triumphant out of the series. And then watch out, Sharks playing Anaheim in the next round or Dallas in the next round. Man, Sharks could be a cup contender.
Yeah, I mean, if they put it all together, I mean, they have the talent on that team to win. So, offensively, defensively, they have a solid goaltender. So, if they blow through them here, I mean, you got a good point. Not forecasting too much, but on your point, piggybacking on your point, Rob, if they do get through this and they steam them here, especially in the next game, watch out. I mean, it kind of back to my point with Columbus earlier. Some of these teams can just dark horse you real quick and start rolling through you, and then all of a sudden they can turn into a pretty well-oiled locomotive really quickly.
Yes, sir.
And now, Anaheim and the Stars, they've only faced off one time in their history, and that was back in 2003.
Pretty memorable one.
When the Ducks went all the way to the Cup final. Unfortunately, they ran into a brick wall that the Flyers ran into that particular year, called the New Jersey Devils.
Yep.
And, well, that series went 6. The Stars at that time were still a pretty good team. They were coming off of a Cup year only, 3 years back at this point. They still had, I believe, no, they didn't have Ed Belfour in goal at the time, but they still had particularly the same core players. Still had Mike Modano and Brendan Morrow, I think, was on the team. And they still had a lot going for them. And unfortunately, the Ducks had Paul Kariya, Teemu Selanne. They had a lot of really good players at the time, and Giguère was having a really good year. He snagged this Conn Smythe from Brodeur, which is kind of funny. But I think it was that one little fail goal that Brodeur scored it himself that cost him that Conn Smythe that year. But
now, was that the first time that the losing goaltender won the Conn Smythe since Hextall?
I think so, to be honest with you, because I don't think any other goalie or any other forward had done that up to that point.
I think it was, and that's an interesting parallel. That's a really interesting
it is
parallel.
a very interesting parallel.
You're talking about Hextall for Simonson back in, was that 87, was it?
I think it was 88.
No, 87, 88.
Oh, it was? Oh, okay, yeah, all right.
Well, you're talking the playoffs, so definitely 88.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I think, I don't remember it ever since, but now that is a good point.
Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting parallel to point those two out right there. But that was the last time these two teams have met. They're now tied at 2. You see this going to 6 again, or do you see this kind of just being like full 7? Like, what do you think this means to the organizations? Do you think they're not really giving a crap too much about this? They care, obviously, because it's their team. But do you see, the Stars are not really a rival, and the Ducks are thinking this. The Ducks are thinking that, and the Stars are thinking the Ducks are really a better team, but they're not really a rival because they've only faced off once.
No, I think the juice has been in the series. They've been playing like they've been rivals for a long time, especially the 2 games that just passed in Dallas because Dallas Stars at home really burst the Ducks bubble, and they didn't like it. They didn't like it one bit.
Yeah, they did not. And plus, Matt Cook with that, knee to knee, that always kind of heightens up a rivalry real fast.
Yeah, I mean that shutout in Game 3 was big for them too. And it obviously steamrolled in right into another 4-goal performance out of them in Game 4 too. So they definitely got they're definitely starting to steam here a little bit on them.
Getting a little chippy. So we got that one, but now let's talk about the one that matters the most to us. We're saving the best for last because we are running up against it.
Okay.
So let's get into it. Flyers and Rangers. Let's delve into the history books, folks. The stuff that matters to us.
Yes.
The Flyers and the Rangers rivalry. Now, it's been Broad Street versus Broadway. The history speaks for itself. Both teams absolutely fiercely hate each other. And both fanhoods hate each other. You can watch the YouTube video of the off-duty cop of the New York Police Department getting the shit kicked out of him by a Philadelphia fan in front of Geno Stakes. This is not a nice rivalry. This is a hated rivalry between the two teams. So the record for the all-time record is 119, 117, 37 New York. New York owns the season record by very little. Yeah. So it just shows you how close these teams are.
Yeah.
And it's just like we go into this playoff series thinking, man, what's the record so far? Now, postseason-wise, Philly owns that 27-20. They own the record in the postseason and own the season series record as they've had, or the postseason series record where the Flyers have had 6 victories to the Rangers 4.
Yeah.
But let us not forget, when the Rangers faced the Flyers the last 3 times, this is a Rangers team that was an old, wheezing team against a very young Legion of Doom team that absolutely crushed them.
Yeah,
so
I was
it's
gonna say,
very different.
What was the last time they faced each other? 97.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Flyers absolutely crushed that team.
Which now I'm gonna give credit where credit's due to Bettman as a quick aside, right? This new format did make it possible for the Flyers and Rangers to meet each other, which has been eluding both. So in that sense, it's good for hockey.
Good point.
It is good for the hockey.
Right.
It's good for the rivalry because the rivalry has kind of been dwindling, and that was only because the Flyers were consistently making the playoffs and the Rangers were consistently shooting themselves in the foot.
Right.
But you get the point. The rivalry, really, the biggest, hottest moment of it was that 2010 shootout between those two teams.
I was about to say, that kind of spiked up the rivalry a little bit, too.
Oh, there was no if and I'll never forget. I still remember, what's his name? Why am I drawing? Our goalie at that point, Boucher, jumping out of there and like jumping around like a kid. You couldn't even tell the guy was on skates.
Now, did you two jump up like we just won the cup? Like I was.
Yes.
Oh no,
Yes,
I'll never forget.
Oh my
that.
God, I was yelling, "Boosh, come on, Boosh, yeah!" And I was just like running around the house, cheering up and down. The Flyers were going to the playoffs, and the Rangers, the stinking Rangers, were not going to be there. It was great.
It almost
just
seems like
the
way the series is going, that the Rangers have that in the back of their head right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's and plus the Rangers do kind of owe Flyers payback for 3 straight playoff eliminations. I mean, let's delve in a little bit. 1987 to get this one off. Patrick Division semifinal. And the Flyers, basically with Ron Hextall and the great Philly teams of the 1980s, battling mano-a-mano with the Rangers teams of the 80s. At this time, this was pre-Mark Messier, so it was pre-Messiah era for the New York Rangers. And the Rangers, even though they had kind of had the Flyers number in the past, the Flyers really were starting to get the Rangers number at this time, and they won in 6 against them. And this is back when everything was back to full 7. There was none of that 5-game bullshit happening anymore.
No doubt.
And it was a weird situation for the Rangers because the Rangers just didn't seem to be in it, through that series. I mean, obviously I look back at the archive because I wasn't there for it, but, definitely, you look back on it, it's like the Rangers were not into this series at all. They were just really drifting away. They didn't know what they were doing. And the truth is, any Rangers fan will tell you, they didn't know what they were looking at. They didn't know what their goal was until Mark Messier came to town and changed everything.
Yeah.
So I think that's what happened that year. They ran into the brick wall known as the Flyers, and they couldn't get through them that particular year. But now the one that, I particularly remember the most, the 97 one I know the most. The 95 one, iffy on me because I was a little kid at the time, so I don't remember too much.
That was a quick series, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a sweep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember it was either a sweep or in 5 games. From what I remember from that, Rangers they were like a peewee team playing a professional team. They just did, and that's no biasness speaking there. That's exactly how it worked out. They just didn't stand a chance against the Flyers that year, and I'm not surprised that they were swept.
And the sad part is that they were the defending Cup champs, and you're just like, it was that easy to beat them? Yeah. Like that, and I think that unfortunately set up the Flyers up for the loss against the Devils because the Devils actually had to really compete for their win in the semifinals because I think they had to face the Penguins. Yeah. So it was a very nasty drag-out fight for them. As for us, it was so easy. It was kind of like, we got the Devils. It was kind of like that for us.
Unfortunately for the Rangers, they were an empty shell of the team that won the Cup. That we, due to injuries, losing players, it wasn't the same. I think all you had in common was Richter. That was about it, really.
Yeah,
that's why it's so tough to get back there. A couple of years or so, you see it happen. So so not often at all, really.
The parity in the NHL. We talked about a lot of different sports on this show today. It's to the utmost in the NHL, and that's why it's very hard to repeat. You don't really see those dynasties that you saw in the early age of hockey and in other sports.
I mean, it's one of those you see teams going from worst to first. I mean, that happens a lot. Guys bottom of the barrel, all of a sudden a year or two in, all of a sudden they're right at the top. So you do see that sway. I mean, you're 100% right with the parity around the league.
Yeah, and it's funny with the particular history of the Rangers and the Flyers because after that 95 year in the Eastern Conference semifinals, the Eastern Conference finals in 97, the Flyers had just done a great job getting through Buffalo, which of course, is another hated New York rival. And they got through the first round sweeping or getting through Tampa really easily. And then they go up against the Rangers, and the Rangers had Mark Messier, Wayne Gretzky. I think Curry was on that team at the time. And you would think, okay, so it's the Edmonton Oilers just in New York form. This might end badly. This might very well end badly because that Rangers team beat the Devils, which beat us. So you're thinking, uh-oh. You're thinking, oh, boy, they might be a challenge.
Right.
And then the series begins, and the Wheeze Kids Phillies, when they faced the 83 Baltimore Orioles, it was kind of that same situation for them. They were wheezing. They really weren't keeping up with the Legion of Doom. The Legion of Doom were young. They were passionate. They were hungry. They wanted to get to the Cup Finals, and they absolutely trounced that Edmonton Oilers Rangers team, basically, that really had nothing going for it for that whole series, and it ended in 5. So you're thinking to yourself, wow, man, that was easy. It's just like, man, are the Rangers even a threat anymore? Like, it's become almost that kind of – we're programmed to think, oh, the Rangers are not scary anymore. No. Well, now obviously the season series and this past seasons will tell you different.
Right.
But you think about the postseason history and you're thinking, man, when the postseason comes, the Rangers don't have it. Because they faced Washington how many times, and they would just suck. Yeah. They would fail to beat Washington half the time.
Yeah, a bunch of first round playoffs. They got beat, knocked right out by them. You're right.
So
that team got old. It was a win now mentality, which they did in '94. God bless them. They got the cup that year, but it was falling off the cliff at that point. Now, a rivalry isn't just all about wins and losses. It's about the blood that's shed in between.
Yeah.
And both of those series, as well as regular season matchups, I dare you to find any more fierce competition between the two teams.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, when New York and Philly's in the same sentence, regardless, there's always going to be some animosity between those matchups. I mean, no matter if one takes the upper hand over the other there's always going to. I mean, even if one sucks and one's really good, you always see a good game usually. You know what I mean? And
you think about the history of the rivalry. I mean, you think about the history of the situation. Think about the people that have gone in between the organizations. I mean, first off, Fred Shero. I mean, the man who coached the Broad Street Bullies to 2 Stanley Cups eventually became the New York Rangers head coach during the early 80s and beat the Flyers at least 2 times.
Yep. And
so you think about that, wow, that's a very strange thing to see Fred Shero wearing the Rangers jacket.
Yeah, because he's so lauded.
So lauded in Philly history. It's just amazing to think that. And then the Eric Lindros fiasco that happened all those years later and there are 2 versions of this. The first one was the Rangers wanted him and they didn't get him because of arbitration, and the Flyers got him. Almost wish we hadn't now with the history that has been played itself out. I almost like to think if Peter Forsberg had been on this team young and in his prime, and we had the team we had going into the 90s with, Recchi and Brenda Moore, and you'd think to yourself, would we have had a Stanley Cup and would we have beaten the Devils with that team instead of Lindros and him, crybabying himself to sleep at night, knowing the fact he could never get through Scott Stevens and the Devils?
That would be a really interesting debate.
Because you think about that. You think about that, and you're just thinking, man. I'm not a big fan of Lindros, and the reason why is because he was a prima donna, and I don't like prima donnas in Philadelphia. And we all knew he was.
Right.
We all knew what we were getting the moment that he came into Philly. I would dare somebody to say, "Oh no, he's a tough guy." No, he's not.
Yeah, I mean, he was a physical freak, but I mean, the guy had a mind of a baby.
Yeah,
from when he came into the league, he was pretty much his parents wiped his ass all the way through his first 5 years in the league. So, I mean, that's never going to go well in Philly.
No,
okay, when your old man's talking for you in the press. Philly fans don't want to hear any of that.
Yeah, that's the ultimate slap in the face to Philadelphia fans, where it's just like, you don't have the balls to talk to us face to face.
Yeah, and when the guy's like 6'5", 245, he's one of the biggest guys in the league, and he's sitting there going behind his parents. It's like, okay, maybe if the guy's like 5'9", he's a Danny Briere, he's a smaller stature player. I don't think it would go well either way, but maybe you could understand it a little more.
Yeah, I mean, you can have more respect. That's why I always love John LeClaire more than I loved Eric Lindros, and I always loved Renberg more than Lindros, because Renberg and LeClaire, you would never hear a thing out of them. They would just be like, "I'm going to let my play and do my talking." It's like, that is a motto to live by.
Yeah,
Mark Recchi did it. Primo did it. Roenick, not really, but Roenick was a mealy mouth, but he backed it up on the ice at least, So that's
still
that.
a mealy mouth. For
Yeah,
NBC
he's still
Sports.
a mealy mouth.
Talking about Roenick, did you hear about, or was it Roenick in that him and Berube got in a fight and that came out? I was watching that. He was commenting on a fight that they got in when they were both playing, like back in like the '80s. And I was listening to it the other day on 94.1. It was kind of funny.
Awesome.
That must have been when Berube was just starting, man, and Roenick.
Oh, you should have seen his hair. It was crazy. He had this like this curly like waft bush like I don't even know. It was mullet. That's what the word I was looking for. Like down like below his down below his.
He had the
shoulders. It
he
was
had
hilarious.
The Rick Tocchet mullet and the Peter Zezel mullet going.
Very similar. Actually, very similar.
That's how you define that '80s team: Peter Zezel, Rick Tocchet. You define them by their mullets.
It was the fad back then, man.
Yeah, it was.
The wacky hair was crazy back in the '70s and the '80s.
I think even in the archive footage, you could see what's his face had a mullet. What's his name? The guy who always speaks for the Flyers. Not Tim Panaccio, but the other one. The one who sounds like
I know
the one who sounds like he's whining all the
Al
time.
Morganti?
Al Morganti, yes. I don't know why I forgot Al Morganti.
Al
but
Morganti.
He had a mullet back then too. It was ridiculous, man.
Some of the sweatshirts, if you ever go back and watch some of the archives on the Great Sports Debate, when it was him, Cataldi, and a couple of Finalllly.
Like Finalllly.
You should see what these guys were wearing. I mean, they're wearing like purple and turquoise sweatshirts with a turtleneck and a coiffed mullet. It was pretty amazing.
It must have been an organizational thing, the mullet, man. It was
It
representation
must have been,
of the
man.
Flyers, business up front, party in the rear.
Well, I mean, Barry Melrose had the good luck mullet when he took the Kings to the Stanley Cup Finals.
That's
You saw how
what
that all
that's what I
played out
kept
for
thinking
him,
about
yeah.
the commentator with the mullet the whole time, Barry Melrose.
Barry
I mean,
Melrose, yeah.
he-
I think he still kind of has
He
a mullet
does.
going,
It's like a gelled mullet, though. He just like gels the side in and it pops the top up a little bit. It's pretty cool.
It's funny. Every time I see Barry Melrose, it's like, man, Melrose never got rid of the mullet.
He's been wearing that same thing for 25 years now.
It's like, that only worked one time, and you lost that final, too. So, I mean, yeah. But anyway, all kidding aside, though, the Rangers' history with the Flyers is so well documented. The Flyers actually have the very first victory. They have the 3-2 win against these two teams in history. So that's interesting to note that the pre-Broad Street Bully era snagged a win from New York 3-2 to start this rivalry off. That's always a good feeling, you know?
So they got that going for them, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, they got them the first time, and the first impressions last, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, the game's tonight, 8 o'clock. I mean, where do you? I mean, just on from both you guys, how do you think the rest of the series is going to go with these guys?
It's hard to say because Mason is that wild card that's been thrown into the situation. And he was the wild card going into it where he was out. And you were thinking, okay, will Emery perform up to snuff? He did great for 2 games. He absolutely, I don't even want to begin how he performed in Game 4. It was awful.
Yeah, I know. I could not have been any
Game
more.
3.
I couldn't have been any more wrong on my assumption on that game. I called in to again. Tommy agreed to disagree the other day. I'm looking for Racer to come out and stand tall and then get a good win in that game. And man, I specifically remember making the point. Come out early and get up in your own building, get the crowd behind you. They did the complete opposite and got down 2-0. And the crowd, I mean, when you're watching a game on TV, I've been to a handful of games, and you know how it gets nuts down there.
Yeah,
and you can the crowd kind of conveys through the TV a little bit, but after that second goal, if the broadcasters weren't talking, you could have probably heard a pin drop in that damn building. I mean,
Absolutely.
it was, and I've been down there in a playoff loss when it gets like that, and it's like, there's 20,000 people that turn into 2 people really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And that's just got to be, when you got 20,000 people staring at you like that, it has to do something to the team, especially when you get behind like that. I mean,
it's one of those things where you feel like, oh man, we're gonna lose.
Right.
It's that first moment you get.
Because once your own fans almost give up, once it gets like that, it almost feels like your own fans are kind of giving up on you to a point. You know what I mean?
You see it in almost everybody's home building. And to the credit of the true fans, I'm not going to point out which teams are and which teams aren't, but Flyers with their team, basically they'll be quiet for a little bit, and then they'll start to get back. one hit, one nice check, forecheck. They really push on their team. And I really feel that had they had stayed out and quiet, Rangers just roll over us in that game.
Mm-hmm.
But they started getting back into it. It spurred on the team, and then you saw Jake Voracek score and make it 2-1. And then it was a real contest. It didn't work out well in the second and third period for Flyers fans. Worked out real well for Rangers fans. But I'm confident tonight that if Flyers can put out the same effort, if not more so, they will be victorious. Not to say that it was Emery's fault.
Mm-hmm.
That he did play pretty well. I think Mason just has a little bit more talent.
Right.
And really tie up this series at 2-2. Here's the thing. If the minute this Flyers team faces adversity, I've seen them crumple time and time again. So if they go back to that well, getting down by 2 goals, I don't like our chances going back in the MSJ.
You couldn't have said it any better. I mean, that was going to be as soon as you got done with your point. I mean, they have to come out a lot better in the first period. They have to come out flying. I thought they were a little stale in the first period, in my opinion, in the last game. They weren't physical. It just looked like they almost – not that they didn't want to be there, but it's playoff hockey in your own building. Like, I expected to see them flying around a little more, and I just saw them standing around out towards the blue line, taking effortless shots into Ranger skates all game long, and just wanted to bang my head off the damn wall.
Yeah.
I mean, it was look, it's not working in the first period. It didn't work in the second period. How you don't regroup and have a different effort at least in the third period was shocking to me, in my opinion. It almost seemed like they got stuck there, and that's where Mason coming back in this game, hopefully that gives them the boost. If you need anything, like I said, this time of the year, you shouldn't really need your starting goaltender coming back to juice you to be ready to play in the playoffs. But look, if that's what does it for you and that's what they need, pray to God, because Steve Mason, we need this one big time. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They have to win this game.
Yeah, it's one of those you got to win.
Yeah, I mean, if they lose, it's over. I mean, you can they lose. I can't see them scraping back from 3-1. I don't, as diehard as the Flyers shirt on my body, right? I just don't. I don't see that happening.
It was good for the Flyers to get that monkey off their back and take a game in MSG, but to expect them to take 2 more in MSG to win this series, it's not going to happen.
That's too much of a stretch.
It'll be so hard to do because Madison Square Garden is like Boston. It's so hard to get a win there.
Yeah.
It very much is because it's an intimidating building, and it's an intimidating fan base. The Rangers fans are like all New York's fans, born and bred to be assholes. Yeah. But anyway.
Getting back to Henry's point, though, why the Flyers didn't make that adjustment going into the either second or third period, that might be indicative of the young coaching staff. Berube, first-time coach. You have Ian LePerriere, first-time coach.
Good point.
You got to make those adjustments.
I was surprised by that. That was probably that's why I had to walk away in the third period, because they were doing the same thing they were doing in the first period in the third period, and they were doing that. And I just it was like a car just kind of backing up, running into the wall, backing up, running into the wall, backing up, running into the wall. I mean, it just almost seemed like a caveman mentality that they were taking through the rest of the game. I liked them get in the fight. I think that was in the second period to at least try to get them going there, but that didn't even work. And I mean, in your home building, you at least want to get the fans going. I think that was the whole point of that. But we'll see. What they're made of. I mean, you're 100% right. That worries me a little bit because when their back's been against the wall in the past, they haven't stood tall in those situations. But we'll see the character of the team, and if Steve Mason, can get his first playoff victory with the Flyers. I mean, I think that in itself could be crucial to dictating the rest of the series.
Yeah, and that would definitely be the key element for Philadelphia right now, is to see Steve Mason get his first win as in postseason period, get it with the Flyers, say, okay, that monkey's off his back. Now we can focus on getting this series victory because all the variables have finally been tied in. The jinx is gone in Madison Square Garden. We took care of that in Game 2. Mason's got his first playoff win. Now we just just need to focus and stay on the ball, because if we can get one more win in Madison Square Garden, we have a chance to win it in Philly.
Right.
And that would be worth it no matter how hard they got to try. It's worth all the blood, all the sweat, all the tears you'll have to spill in 2 games to try and get that last win in Game 6, to send the Rangers packing, crying away. That's always worth it.
I think, if Claude Giroux can get a goal, and
yes,
in this game, they win this game.
Yeah.
I think if Claude can come out and just I don't know if he's got bad ribs. I don't know if he's got bad leg. I don't know. Going back to what I was saying, I don't think we'll ever really know. But almost when he took that face-off from Crosby a couple years back and just went down the ice and got that goal right in the beginning of the game to really kind of dictate the way that game was going to go, and eventually the way that series went, he needs to have that moment, because I think the team really – you saw in the beginning of this season, in the regular season, when he was playing like crap, the team played like crap. Now, obviously, you always need your captain to be that essential player to really jumpstart the team. But I think what you're seeing right now with the rest of the team is kind of what you're seeing out of him. And I think if he gets going, the rest of his team can kind of piggyback onto that and hopefully take this series. And if that's the case, and you get a couple more wins, and Mason gets a couple, obviously he would have a couple playoff victories at this point in time, and you get Claude going back again, we might be able to do some damage here in the playoffs. Yeah. You know what I mean?
You're absolutely right. A captain does lead his team, but Claude to the utmost. If he's playing poorly, the team plays poor. It's so correlated.
It almost zaps the energy of these guys. It almost seems, because Scotty doesn't look like half the player he does. Wayne Simmons, he had that one goal in the other game, but he hasn't done much, which has been a little surprising for me, because he's been that consistent factor for them all year. Even when Claude, in my opinion, I think he was the MVP of the season from start to finish. I think he was the most consistent player, gave them what they needed. He's kind of disappeared a little bit in this series. He had the goal, but he's not that grittiness. He's had a couple good hits and stuff like that, but I haven't really seen that essential big play that really helps them catapult, getting some momentum going in any of these damn games.
He's been present, but not ever present. And honestly, if Flyers go on to win tonight, he needs to be a standout star.
Right.
That's for sure.
He needs to be. And that's the key right now, is G stepping up and Mason shutting down. That's the key right now for the Flyers to win this series. That formula can win them this series.
If they don't have a better offensive, tactic to get around these block shots, though, tonight, I'm going to seriously question Craig Berube at the end of this series. I'm going to tell you that now, though. If they do not come out with some kind of better offensive strategy to get the puck in deep and to start getting 2 or 3 guys in front of them, I don't care if you got to leave one guy back. They got to try something different here.
They do.
If I see more than 40 shots taken that don't get on goal tonight, something. That's just going to be terrible.
Something's wrong, because then it's the same thing with Peter Laviolette when they faced the Devils in 2012. They didn't change their game plan. The Devils were absolutely crushing the Flyers, and it was just like, well, if that's not working, change your damn game plan.
Right. I understand you have a system. Okay, I get that. But we saw the same thing, not to get too off topic, but with Andy Reid. You see the same damn mentality, and what happened? You know what I mean? You never won anything. You know what I mean?
Eventually, you become the best-selling book to every coach and every team in the league.
100%. It doesn't matter if you can get into the playoffs, and I think it's been impressive what he's done with this team as a young coach, with young coaches around to get them where they were, to take over the team 3 games into the season, get them where they're at. But if you can't really adjust in the playoffs, it's going to be a rough recipe there for you.
It will be. So Flyers and Rangers tonight. I do believe that game is at 7. If I do stand correct.
Actually, you are right. So I said 8 earlier. You are right, Mr. Sensuti.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Waholek. And
For
We're
some
so formal today.
Yeah, we're so very
For
formal.
some reason,
Mr. Povia, it's good to see you, sir.
Excuse me, Dr. Povia.
Dr. Povia, I apologize.
I think the caller earlier, did he call you Dr. Sincerely? Did I hear that Dr.
No,
Sincerely?
he called
Or was it Dr. Povia?
He called Rob
okay.
Dr. Povia.
That's from going out to the bars. I'm a surgeon with the ladies. You know what I mean?
Dissecting a few broads here and there. Nothing bad.
Oh,
with
no,
that.
not like that. No.
Rob, is that a chick in the back of your trunk? No.
No Hannibal Lecter.
No Ted Bundy around
Not
here.
wearing a
Got
skin
it.
jacket?
Yeah.
Put lotion in the basket.
It does what it is told.
Hello, Clarice. But we've that's a good way to end the show.
It's a great little segue towards the end of the show.
Yeah.
You're right.
So it's time for last call. We had a lot of fun here tonight. And, here tonight, it's the afternoon, for God's sakes. Oh, God, I think I've had one too many. I'm starting to see stars out there. Maybe that's just around my head. But anyway, we've had a great show. We've had a great time. It's great to have our third band in today.
Yeah, thanks for bringing me back in the
It was
studio with you guys.
awesome.
I had a great time with
Stepping
both
up
of you
to
again.
the plate and delivering the goods. And, of course, Rob, always the man himself, the man with all the power and all the package himself, Rob Povia over here. And, of course, your host, Matt Sinsuti, working the boards. It has been a great show, guys. Awesome to do it with you. And, again, Flyers, Rangers tonight. Game number...
Go Flyers.
Yeah, guy, game number 4, the biggest game of them all, really, it is, for the Flyers-wise. And they've got to win tonight. It's all a matter of time. They've got to try and win. Go Flyers. Hopefully they can beat those stinking Rangers and send them back to Broadway crying like they always have done in the past. And we'll see what happens, gentlemen. We will see what happens. From all of us here at the Hockey Happy Hour, Matt Sinsuti, Rob Povia, and Henry Waholek, we will see you guys next time on the Hockey Happy Hour. Stay fresh, stay cool, keep the hockey faith, and keep the Flyers faith. Go Flyers.
Go Flyers.
We'll see you guys next week on the Hockey Happy Hour. Here's Joe Bonamassa with Dust Bowl.
Make my own way. I'm gonna head downtown. Walk around, settle down, find me a pop a drink. Don't need a helmet to get me through life. I walk across the water, blame it on foolish pride. Lifting me up, tear me down. All you give me is indecision. The glass is run around, bringing me higher, keeping me whole. Now I feel like I'm living in a dust bowl. Diamonds and pearls. You're that kind of girl. You size me up to break me down while you're sipping on your Crown Royal. I'll give you shelter, baby, it's your call. It's hard to find truth within when you're living in your own zone. Lifting me up, tear me down. All you give me is indecision. The glass is run around, bringing me higher, keeping me whole. Now I feel like I'm living in a dust bowl. the same kind of pain. All that's left for me to lose is meant for you to gain. Playing it close, stealing your time. Who cares anyway? I've gone the extra mile. Lifting me up, tearing me down. All you give me is indecision. The glass is